very smooth.
Coming out at like 3:30, 4 o'clock. Only I can make it.
Maybe if I had the proper equipment and wasn't a cheap ass, we wouldn't be here. Well, hello there.
Hello.
On today's episode of Min-Maxing, no! What about an 11.5 in 5.56 and a 16-inch 308? Good question, honestly. I'm gonna say at the onset though, the only way this makes sense to me is if the 11.5 is configured either with a red dot or a small LPVO, and the 308 is set up as a DMR, the 762x51, whichever you prefer. But there's some sort of enhanced range capability with the 762/308, a bipod, and the ability to shoot precisely at range. If it's set up as a battle rifle, then it doesn't make any sense to me. It's a schizo loadout, and if you have a battle rifle, just optimize yourself for a battle rifle. Don't try to run two. It's not conducive. It doesn't give you any more capabilities as far as being able to precisely engage a distance. Just messing with my light, madam. Stop trying to sit on my notes. I had the opportunity to shoot with Vor 1998, and he had almost the same exact setup. This is why I think y'all are talking. And if you didn't watch my update video, he also had a 19X with a red dot on top of it and a compensator. So all the 19X and G45 guys got together with the red dot guys and had him show up to try to convince me. Nah, he's a good dude. It was a great time shooting, honestly. Really laid back guy. His buddy was cool too. Just an overall good shooting day. Anyhow, Vor 1998 had a PWS Mark 111 Mod 2 11.5. It had, as you can see in the front, a Modlite PLH V2 Arasaka mount. It had an NX8, which I still don't like. Sorry, bud. A 193 ADM Recon mount, LaRue MBT 2S flat face trigger, a Zeneco Purse 3, and a Dead Air Sandman S. His Scar 17 had a 3.6 to 18 Tremor 3 no illumination and a Badger 1.54 mount. Geisley Super Scar trigger. It did have a PWS Scar rail extension and an Atlas V8 bipod. Overall, very nice shooting gun. I didn't bring my 11.5 or my MR762 this go around. I just brought my Geisley to mess around with and a bunch of pistols. So they got to shoot a Mark 23 and a few of my guns, and that was about it. Anyways, back to the topic of the video, the 11.5. What's it good for and what's it not good for? What's the idea behind running this in the first place? Well, 11.5s are maneuverable and lightweight. They're good out to about 400 yards with 75 to 77 grain ammo. I know some guys are gonna try to convince me otherwise.
Oh, I'm chasing this guy. No, he's chasing me.
But we're not putting a bipod on it or a 4 to 16 attacker. We're just running it as it's intended to be, either with a small LPVO like this or a red dot, something like that. A realistic 11.5 setup. They're also not too long with a suppressor, and let's be honest, they're easy to work with all day. They're very handy, and as long as you set it up right and you have a properly gassed 11.5, you can do a lot of good stuff with it. Not super far, not precise engagements out to distance, but for what it is, very handy, very usable.
I see this as an absolute win.
Although it's not so great for ranged engagements, not great for vibe checking any plates whatsoever, it's much louder than a 14.5 to 16 inch or a 20 inch, and not a lot of real estate. So if it does get heavy, it's gonna become a brick and not disperse that weight at all. Alright, I know Harambe isn't done yet, but just imagine that it has an OKW and an Atlas bipod on it with a Geisley charging handle, and then it would be done. And then a muzzle device and a Surefire RC2 and 7.62. But anyways, 16-inch DMR in 7.62 by 51 or 308. I would even entertain 6.5 Creedmoor for those that are curious in the LMT or Knights, or I guess Geisley's 6mm arc. A lot of people are excited for that round too, just so nobody feels left out.
Thank you.
16-inch is a good size package for a designated marksman rifle. It gives you increased range, increased energy and effect on target, and it's much better against wind or other atmospheric conditions. Pair that with a quality manufacturer that's going to give you a quality barrel, and you'll get very nice precision capability like this MR762. What's the bad though? It's heavy, it's spendy, less ammo capacity, and heavier ammo in larger magazines makes you want to carry less anyway, and more recoil. Another thing that I want to cover real fast, this isn't necessarily a negative, but a lot of people equate 7.62 by 51 or 308 barrel lengths with 5.56. Most people don't do it with 6.5 Creedmoor or any of those other high velocity 6mm or 6.5mm cartridges, but with 308, someone will say, oh, a 16-inch barrel 308's just like a 16-inch barrel 5.56. It's not. In a 7.62 by 51, 11.5 to 13.5 is like a 7.5 to 10.3. It's not very viable. They exist for having something small to assault a building with to shoot 7.62 really loudly. They're very loud, they're not very effective, and they don't stabilize the bullets very well, so they're not very accurate.
Yeah, well, you know, that's just like your opinion, man.
A 16-inch barrel is kind of like a 12.5 to 14.5-ish, and when you see some manufacturers talk about a 16-inch barrel 308 or 7.62, like Trader Field Armory, they'll say, oh, our SOCOM 16S is only good out to, you know, about 300 to 400 yards. And you're like, what the fuck? Or 500 yards tops. And you're like, that doesn't make any sense. It's a whole 308. But you're losing a lot of velocity. 7.62 by 51 and 308 need those longer barrel lengths to remain stable, get the velocity they need, and get out there. So when you're talking about running a quote-unquote effective barrel length for 308 or 7.62, you're really looking between 20 to 24 inches. I think I'm almost positive there's a 26 and 28 out there. Those are going to be your most optimum for velocity, but obviously not optimum for maneuvering around. So 20 to 24, that's about the happy place for bolt action. And when you use a 20-inch, you kind of feel like you're in that 16-inch category, and then the 24, 26, or 28 feels like a 20-inch category for 5.56. So just keep that in mind. A lot of cats want to say good enough or just as good or any of that other stuff, and you really have to understand that rifle rounds behave much differently than, say, pistols. So you really have to be cognizant of what your round in your platform selection is going to do. So a 16-inch 7.62 by 51 or 308 is great for a lot of stuff. It's good for intermediate ranges out to about 700-800 yards. I don't plan on shooting this past 800 yards. I know there's some guys that took some hand loads out to some crazy distances, but as far as the average rifleman or the average shooter, between 500 and 800 yards is about where I'm comfortable pushing this thing out to, especially in a 16-inch, and that's again pairing it with either 168 grain or 175 grain. It just is what it is. You get a tip bullet, like a Black Hills or something like that, ELD match from Hornady, something like that, give you a little bit better ballistic coefficient, but You just gotta understand that 16-inch isn't optimum for 308 or 7.62 by 51. So what's the idea behind this? Other than a Ghost Recon Wildlands fantasy scenario or some overkill Call of Duty loadout, a realistic application for this is if you are moving to an elevated position or something like that, or you have to go through buildings in an urban scenario and you're trying to get to a location to set up, you want something quick and handy while you're carrying that big ass bag full of your precision gear. I don't know how realistic that is, and it's definitely not a fast setup. You're not going anywhere quick. You're gonna be a giant turtle. You're gonna be bumping into stuff. It's nice to have something light and handy. If you're in a prone position, you're looking far away and you hear something close up happen and you don't wanna lose where you're set up, so you pick up the lightweight gun and you do close in work and then get back to the longer range precision setup. But again, that's kind of a fantasy scenario. Now, I do understand that a lot of people don't view 5.56 as an effective round past 300-400 yards anyway, regardless of barrel length. And this is kind of where the min-maxing comes in. They look at 5.56, and even with a nice effective setup, I have to work this hard anyway to achieve that precision. I gotta fight the wind, I gotta do all this stuff. Why don't I just use a 308 or 7.62 by 51 or your 6.5 or 6mm, whatever. But why don't I just go to that anyway, because it's gonna be a lot easier to get those hits. I don't necessarily think that's a bad idea, quite frankly. And while there are very effective 5.56 setups, like my MR 5.56 with the 77 grain TMKs and the 1-8, very stable rifle to shoot out of out to range, and I can get very confident hits out to 500. Some people want to do it with more energy and capability and ease of precision, which is where your 308 gun comes in. I know some of you are in that urban sniper book a lot. This would be good for that. Now, I'd like to caution you against reading a book and feeling like that's downloading skills and information like this is the Matrix.
I know Kung Fu.
Show me.
It is possible to do something like that, although you're going to be very clunky. And 7.62 by 51 ammunition is heavy. I don't recommend just running around with a compromised loadout. A combat load for 5.56 is 7 magazines at a minimum, 10 magazines if you can. I run 7 30 rounders and 2 20 rounders. So I have different capabilities, but I also have a backpack full of spare magazines that are already loaded. So really it's more than that, but accessible between 7 to 10 mags. If you're running a 308 rig or some sort of precision rig with your 5.56, you're gonna compromise on 5.56 and you're gonna compromise on 308. The whole reason we run 5.56 in the first place is to be able to engage multiple targets quickly. And I'm gonna be honest with you, 100 yards and in, running a 308 or 7.62 by 51, you can't engage them as quickly unless you have an SR25 with the best brake and the best hand-loaded ammo, and you could just run it quickly and keep it flat. But it's gonna take a lot of extra work. Whereas I don't think anyone's gonna argue that 5.56 isn't softer shooting. Again, so long as you have a firearm from a manufacturer that's gassed it properly. But even running 77 grain, you're not gonna feel a whole lot of recoil impulse, and you can engage follow-up shots pretty quickly. Put that in a nice, lightweight, maneuverable 11.5-inch package with a suppressor even, you're gonna be doing just fine. The bottom line becomes, what are you trying to do? If you're trying to be Urban Sniper 101 and run around and be this giant tactical turtle,
I'll tell him you'll bring him back.
try to squeeze through tight holes with all this gear on and all that other stuff just to set up and take a couple pot shots and roll out. I don't know if it's a really realistic setup. However, I do understand the argument from a lot of shooters that, hey, 5.56 is only good this far anyway. I'm not gonna buy 77 grain. I'm not gonna buy 75 grain. I'm not even gonna buy 69 grain. I'm gonna buy 55 grain and call it a day. Well, if that's the case, then of course your 308 is gonna perform better, even if it's just M80 ball. I mean, it's a lot easier also to source quality loads for 7.62x51 or 308 because there's a very plentiful array of ammunition that's effective. 168 grain, 175 grain is common enough that I can source it regularly, and even when we're in peak Rona ammo apocalypse, I could still source 308. In fact, I was restocking 308 because 5.56 and 9mm were all gone and 45 was way too expensive and also gone. So I took that opportunity to restock my 308 supply. Having the 308 option is very good, and speaking to 308 specifically, that round's going nowhere. I know a lot of people are like, oh, 6.5 is gonna kill 308. It's not. It never will. There's more 308s in the United States than there are any other rifle caliber, I'm almost positive. And I know there's a lot of 30-06s. There may be more 30-06s than 6.5 Creedmoors. The infrastructure that's in place for 308 and 30-06 is gonna be around for a very long time. So does it benefit you to have a 308 or a 7.62x51? Absolutely. As far as the 5.56 gun goes, the 11.5, especially if you're in an urban center, is probably fine. I know some people like to argue with me that they're only gonna see a certain distance anyway, or as a civilian, whatever, but realistically, 400 yards is not out of the realm of possibility, especially on a long street, or even if you're 100 yards away from something, if you're shooting up, if they're on the 7th story and you're only 100 yards from the building, but you're shooting up, you actually have to hold over. So you need that extra velocity so the bullet can come back down after going up. It's kind of complicated math. If you're shooting on a down angle, it actually helps, but if you're shooting up at something, not a good time. A lot of people won't talk about that. Or just simple angles, you know, because they don't think about that stuff. I get it. And I don't expect people to think about this stuff all the time, and it's, you know, by and large, it's fantasy stuff, so they're only gonna think about the fantasy that makes them a badass. They're not gonna think about how am I gonna get smoked, where guys that do this professionally, and I hate saying I do it professionally, I've had a lot of training, but I haven't fired any shots at anger, except with a 240 at a drone boat, but I've been killed a lot, quote unquote, in training, so I think about this stuff. And it's also part of our mindset to think like, oh, hey, which area can they come from, you know? Just doing basic security and all that stuff. But I don't expect other people to think that way. I only expect people to have main character syndrome or let me pack for whatever I want. But speaking strictly on the practical aspect, is having just an 11.5 and 5.56 fine? Yes. Is having a 16-inch 308 fine? Absolutely. 18-inch, 20-inch, whatever. If you want to do your long-range work with your 6.5 and go broke, or even a 308 with quality ammunition and go broke, that's up to you. I mean, I can't deny that running Harambe is awesome, and shooting it accurately is great, and hearing the reports at distance with authority is excellent. So, do I have a lot of confidence in that setup? Absolutely. Even my 5.56 guns, I have a lot of confidence in them, and I have a lot of different 5.56 guns to do different things for me. If you want to just have a simple 5.56 gun, be it 11.5, a 10.5, or a 12.5, but the question was asked of 11.5 inches, so let's say 11.5, and then your 308 gun to run out to distance, I don't see a problem with that. I have personal preferences, and I think if you're going to do a certain thing, or you're going to scale up, or you're going to do X, Y, and Z, then you should have a different 5.56 gun. But just speaking to the question that was asked, I don't personally see a problem with it. I think it's perfectly viable so long as you understand your limitations. And if serious things do pop off, some people will think, well, I'm more maneuverable like this. You won't be. It'll be the exact opposite. You're going to be this giant, thick battle turtle that's going to be, and not a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, not something cool. A giant battle turtle with nothing but heavy stuff that you're lugging around. You're gonna be tired, you're gonna be going through water like crazy and burning calories. The easy way to find out is to load it out. Load yourself out and see what you can do in obviously a legal area to do that. But if you want to test it, go test it. But I've talked enough. We'll see how many of these I do outside of this. This isn't like a series video like I'm doing with rifle barrel lengths or any of that other stuff. It's more someone asked the question and I wanted to answer it. And I uniquely had an opportunity with VOR 1998 to answer that question, and it kind of put me in that headspace anyway. So hope y'all are doing well. Thanks for watching. Take care out there.